I've been watching these recordings on YouTube, these videos on YouTube of people's near-death experiences. And I just find them so inspiring and fascinating. They just fill me with hope and wonder and curiosity and bring up all kinds of questions regarding my Christian theology. In many ways, it seems to affirm a lot of what I believe, and then in some ways, it seems to challenge, especially, well, and we can get into this later, but one idea is around reincarnation. I'm Daniel London. I'm the rector at Christ Church Eureka, and I'm here with the Reverend Deborah Hubbard, who is a Presbyterian minister and who serves as one of the co-pastors of Grace Good Shepherd in McKinleyville, also known as Abbey of the Redwoods. And I had the honor and joy of worshiping at Grace Good Shepherd, Abbey of the Redwoods. When was it? During Lent, I believe. I think during
it was a Wednesday evening service, correct?
Wednesday evening service, lovely service. And then after the service, we spoke for another about like hour and a half or so. And we talked about all sorts. We went quite deep, quite quickly. We talked about suicide, and the moral, ethical issues around that. And I talked about how I had been studying near-death experiences. And then as we were leaving, you said that you had an experience that sounds like you would categorize as an NDE.
Yes.
Yeah, in a coma. So I want to hear about that. I want to just back up and say part of my interest in it involves one of my favorite theologians, Thomas Merton, thought she was the greatest English theologian, and that is Julian of Norwich, the 14th century English mystic, who obviously it might be anachronistic to say this, but she seemed to have a near-death experience, and such a profound one, and it took her decades to reflect on it and kind of mine the spiritual wisdom within it. And it's been such a source of, again, comfort and hope and a theological curiosity for me. And she's one of the first to talk about universalism in all of Christianity, because that's what she was, that's what was real to her. And so I've been thinking about doing a project, like a distillation of Julian's showings. And I thought, well, how interesting would it be to approach her work through the lens of near-death experiences? And so I just started listening to near-death experiences on YouTube and just found them so fascinating. And so maybe you already have yours recorded out there, or I imagine you've written on it.
No, I don't.
Well, this is I just feel like let's capture this. And I've also been told that, well, there's this book, Life After Life, that I just finished reading, Raymond Moody. He says he interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of people with NDEs. He did say there's something about listening to people talk about their experiences as opposed to reading what they've written. So I'm going to go ahead and just begin with a question that's often asked of people with NDEs. What was your life like before your experience? And then tell me about your near-death experience.
Okay. Actually, that gives you a context. So I'm glad you asked to frame the question that way. So I was 16 years old, about 6 weeks before my 17th birthday. I was really popular in school. I was a cheerleader and an athlete. I lettered in all 4 varsity sports before that time. This was the first, when I was a freshman in high school, it was the first year Title IX went into effect. So it was the first year they had girls' sports in my small hometown, okay? So, and my dad was a coach, and, I was really excited, and, so December 26, 1974, dates me. My best friend and I were going somewhere we weren't supposed to go. I had to get back for cheerleading in the holiday tournaments, and my boyfriend was a, big shot in high school. And, we were seeing these 2 other guys that were like freaks, but I always, was friends with everybody. I didn't like just being with a popular crowd. I didn't think, it was like a justice issue for me. I went to church. My mom was a Sunday school teacher. My dad was an elder, and all this. And, it just, so I screw the mores of school, right? I was gonna, so we were someplace we weren't supposed to be. So I didn't tell my mom where I was going. I was with my best friend. We got in the car. And me and my boyfriend were following my best friend and her. And instead of stopping at the stoplight, it was dusk. It was dark. There was a black car speeding. Instead of him stopping again after my girlfriend took off, he took off. And bam, we were broadsided. His brother was sitting on one side of me. He was driving. I was sitting in the middle. This car buckled up. My skull was fractured on the ceiling of the car. I swallowed my tongue. My spleen was ruptured. My bladder was broken. And anyway, my girlfriend came back, thought I had broken my neck because, I started turning blue. The ambulance got there, fortunately, pulled out my tongue. I was in a coma for the next 19 days. Okay.
Wow.
But while I was in the coma, I never felt like I lost consciousness.
Gosh.
Okay. I didn't have a body, whatever that meant. It was the most serene sense of bliss I had ever experienced. I was really at one with the universe. And I didn't want to go back. Whatever going back meant, I didn't see any visions. I didn't hear any voices, but I knew I was in God's presence. Everything was it was just bliss. Then I sort of felt this pulling sensation, which I've since, after a lot of reading and stuff, felt like it was in the book of Ecclesiastes. There's something called the court of life. And I felt this awareness of God giving me an awareness, not a voice. Debbie, I'm not through with you yet. You've got a purpose. And I came to hooked up to all these machines, paralyzed on my right side. I couldn't talk. I couldn't move, unable to move or speak. All I could do was try to write with my left hand and indicate like this that I would want to talk. I still have the scratchings from when I tried to communicate, right? And it took me weeks to speak again. It took me months to limp and try to walk again and stuff. But after I came to and learned and was able to do all of that, I felt like the rest of my life was a journey discovering what God wanted me to do. Initially, I went into psychology at the University of Michigan because I wanted to understand. I saw double for 2 years. I had 2 more eye surgeries. They took out my spleen. They repaired my bladder to finish what happened to me medically. And again, I was partially paralyzed on my right side. I gradually, with physical therapy and all these hospitals, I was in and out of hospitals doing outpatient. And because my dad was a coach and he set up our basement as a workout place, they let me go back to school. And because I went to such a small school, I was able to hold on to the wall while I was walking. The students would, they were really cool. My first word was dirty. They announced it on the intercom. I mean, I had a church and a school and everybody just pulling for me. I just had this community of faith that was just wonderful. And because teachers came and tutored me, I was able to graduate from high school as a valedictorian with a 4.0. I mean, I kept, and I would run around to my teachers. Am I still as smart as I used to be? Because of course they said I sustained brain damage being in a coma for 19 days, right? And because my speech was so slurred and I had to grapple with, the left side of my brain, interfering, and I saw a double for two. Like I said, it was like I was Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame. My eye kind of hung down there, and this kind of flipped up, and anyway.
Oh,
But through all of that, like I said, my life was a quest of finding out what it was that God wasn't through with me, and what my purpose was. My home church pastor kept saying, Deb, there's always the ministry. And I said, no way, girls, John, girls don't go into the ministry, right? This was late 70s.
mm-hmm.
So even though the Presbyterians had been ordaining women in the ministry since the 50s, I still never saw, in Michigan, I never saw women ever in the ministry, right? And so, but then while I was studying psychology at the University of Michigan, and I concentrated on some of these near-death experiences, I did a lot of research, with the visions and the voices, and that's where I came across this Court of Life from Ecclesiastes. And going, wow, that connected with me. And a lot of stuff did connect with me. The thing about feeling at one with the universe, the feeling this all-pervasive grace. I am not afraid of death anymore. And I haven't been since I was 16. How could I be when all I know is bliss is going to be there, But yeah, I still had life to live. I still had, why did God bring me back? Because the doctors, back up a little bit, I forgot to tell you, the doctors told my parents to get ready for a funeral. The doctors told my parents I would never walk again. But you don't tell a 16-year-old athlete that she's never going to walk. I'll show them, right? And it sort of it activated this fighting spirit in me that I already had through justice issues and, in my church and in school, and just, always wanting to be an iconoclast and, break the stereotypes. So anyway, when I felt my call, while I was getting my degree in psychology, I started working with criminally insane men. They were either not guilty by reason of insanity or mentally incompetent to stand trial. And what I connected with them was, oh my gosh, they're in cages. And then I realized, oh my God, white collar crime rips off $44 billion annually. Nobody goes to prison. And all these people are black and brown, or they're poor white. They can't afford lawyers. I'm like, there's a double standard and this is not fair. And it played right into my justice feelings, and it played into my feeling of being in a body that wouldn't cooperate. I knew what it was like to feel locked in, right? But my mind was free. Before I could talk, when I had to learn how to talk again, I was so frustrated because I couldn't even communicate. It was like, my home church pastor sitting there shaking his head. I really had problems with God on this one. And I'm inside unable to communicate, saying, but John, I'm alive. What do you mean you're having problems with God? This is great. It's a miracle. I'm alive. So see, I'm getting passionate even now. I'm sorry. It's just so
awesome.
meaningful. And so every time I get frustrated, I just feel so grounded, and I can go back and access that. Wow. I don't have anything to complain about. I've got most of my feeling back. I still, struggle with eye-hand coordination on my right side. There's still all kinds of vestiges. I see double without my contacts if I don't have them in right or something. But so what? I'm alive. I can do all this stuff. And so I feel like, again, my journey is trying to give back. And, nobody could understand it. Everybody talked about it as a miracle. And I know for a fact, yeah. And so I'm not afraid of death. I know that I'm so much more than my physical body. And even the stuff they've discovered in science since I was in school, right? It's like, this is like quantum physics. Yeah. The string theory, and first it was quarks and now string theory, and then it's like, and what do they call it? Entanglement.
Quantum entanglement.
Yeah, and just thinking about how prayer works. You know, you can pray for somebody that are and how that impacts energy. And I lived through it. I mean, I know, I can feel it. I know that quantum entanglement is real. I know that everything quantum physics is trying to explain is like, okay, well, science is the humanity's way of trying to understand God, right? And whether, they didn't even have the God particle back then, but I knew it. I
Right, right.
experienced it. And what you said about Julian of Norwalk and being universal, and it's like, even though I was raised Christian and I'm grounded in Christianity, and that's my life experience and work and the teachings of Jesus, my experience wasn't with Jesus
Mm,
because
wow.
I'm not what do you call it? You know how they attack Christians for being polytheistic, right? Because of our doctrine of the Trinity. Well, it was God, and Jesus and God are the one. Well, my oneness was God. I didn't separate the teachings of Christ, or the person Jesus of Nazareth with
Yeah.
my experience. It was with the divine life.
Mm,
However we want to define the divine life. Am I making sense?
yeah, totally.
And that's why I can be so open to other world religions
Right.
and other traditions and other ways of expressing, because it's like the whole thing about meditation. And actually, you bring up some books, and I wanted to bring up My Stroke of Insight by Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, A Brain Scientist's Personal Journey. Okay, so this is the closest explanation scientifically of what I went through in terms of what she experienced when she was in a coma, and explaining it neuroscientifically. But she talks about how she was comforted by this expanding sense of grace, and she talks about how God was one with the universe, and how that uh it just can't be defined. And so William James talks about this in his variety of religious experiences. And
Right.
I think he wrote this in 1901 or something.
Yeah, the
But but
ineffable. Yeah.
but even that, yeah, it's ineffable. These experiences are ineffable. You cannot explain them, and any attempt to do so on my part is so limited.
Yeah, and that's yeah, it's so hard for my brain to wrap my head around your experience. So how long was the coma again?
19 days.
19 days. And so yeah, I hear a lot of people say that they weren't in a body, but they were conscious. And
Mm-hmm.
there was this experience of bliss, and it's hard to describe. And it was an experience of being love, like this tremendous love.
Mm-hmm.
But and it sounds like you talk about that with this oneness. But
Mm-hmm.
then what's hard for me to understand is usually when I hear some of these accounts, it's somebody with not having a body, but can still kind of see what's going on around the body that is clinically dead. But you didn't have that. So
Nope.
you, so did you see, so you didn't see anything.
Nope.
You just were.
It was being, right? It
You're
was
just,
just,
you were being.
I was just, but I was still conscious. I
Yeah.
can't explain it. It's
It's like
again,
you're everywhere.
right. And so who knows? Could I have been not that close to death? I mean, they told my parents to get ready for a funeral. I was just hooked up to all these machines. Um, they said one time when my parents told me that, because I was, in the ICU, hooked up to all these machines, and they brought somebody else in my room. And they started talking to her about this car accident she was in. And all my vitals, all my machines went ape shit. I'm
Mm.
sorry, they just went. So obviously, I had some level of still being there. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, so when people were talking about the car accident, or is it a different car accident?
Because it
Or
was the woman who they brought in, the girl they brought in
uh
was in a car accident, and were talking to her
uh
in the same room,
and
and
your
my
body was
vitals
responding.
went crazy. I
Uh,
was still unconscious.
Yeah.
Still in the coma. But
Wow.
while I was comatose, they said they thought they were losing me then,
Oh, wow.
but so there, I had to have some level of awareness still where my body was, even though that wasn't what I experienced. I
Right.
experienced no body, but a total self at one with the divine life.
And no sense of how, no sense of duration, like no sense of how long that lasted.
Nope, I had no idea what time. And I didn't have any memory of the first 6 months before my accident. I didn't remember getting in the car that day. I didn't remember we had won the football championship for the first time in 20 years. I didn't remember any of the first, I tried to take an exam about organic and inorganic chemistry, and I only knew the inorganic part because I totally forgot. I mean, it was, like, I can't believe how nice my professors must have been to tutor me and all that. But it's
But
yeah.
there was a moment at the end of this period of bliss where you do hear a voice and you understand that it's
No,
God.
I didn't hear a voice. It was
Oh,
an
you didn't.
awareness.
It was an
It was,
awareness.
it was, it was, it was an awareness. It was just when you're in the presence of God, again, ineffable.
Yeah.
When you feel like you're in the presence of the divine life, and Debbie, I'm not through with you yet. But again, it wasn't a voice.
Right, right. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that it's sort of almost a telepathic communication.
It's yes, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. You got
Because
that.
I was at one with the divine life, and so there was no separation, and so
But in that awareness, you felt like you were addressed as Debbie.
yeah,
Is that
yeah.
how you were addressed at the time?
Yes, that was others. There is this dualness of consciousness
Yeah.
when you are in this state of being with the divine life or at one with the universe. There can still be this dual consciousness. And again, how do you explain the mystery, right?
Yeah.
How do you explain it? You can't. It's just so limited.
And you said it was Debbie, something like Debbie, I'm not through with you yet. You
You've
still
got a purpose.
you have a
Yeah,
purpose.
yes,
And that became your driving
yes.
force the
My
rest of
life
your life.
journey to discover what that was. And I found it in prison ministry.
In prison ministry, that's where you found the
And
purpose.
that's what I did for the first,
Oh,
that's what I did for the first 19 years of my career.
oh my gosh.
And well, again, it was partially because I didn't see women in the ministry, I think, but mostly because of my accident experience, and as I, grew through stuff, I recognized that, I still wanted to change things in the church too. And now my calling's become to get back to this unity, right? Look at this divisiveness in our country. Look at
Yeah.
this crap. Christians, people calling themselves Christians that are doing anything but following the teachings of Jesus. Give me a break. So how can we learn the wisdom of all these world? Because everything is one. And all the major world religions say that,
So why did you decide? So you obviously grew up in the church and you grew up Presbyterian.
Yes.
So I wonder, was there ever a moment or a period when you thought, "Ooh, do I want to? I'm not satisfied with Christianity." When I was experiencing that bliss, I did not encounter Jesus. Did you ever go on a spiritual quest outside of Christianity? You always
No,
felt,
because I was so grounded in my own faith tradition. I was
yeah,
so grounded with my home church and my pastor, and feeling my life was saved. Why
yeah,
would I want to change?
right,
Why? That but I've always said if I was born in Japan, I'd be a Buddhist
right,
because
right.
I think religion is so culturally conditioned. It's such, you know, um, yeah. So, I wouldn't ever leave that. At the same time, because of this inclusion and because of what I learned in prison ministry. I mean, when you work in prisons as a chaplain, you have to provide all these you have to provide everybody's spiritual tradition. So
Yeah.
we had to have medicine men come in. We had to, and the chaplain's office has to facilitate all of that. They always had a Protestant chaplain and a Catholic chaplain. And so I learned so much. And it, again, the whole thing, my life has been a journey of trying to figure out how my experience connects with the divine life, bringing me home, bringing me back, bringing me, how do I share that love, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Would you, in your ministry, like in your prison ministry and also in your ministry in McKinleyville, how often do you refer back or share your near-death experience?
Um,
Refer back to a lot. And then
once
also
in a
along with
while,
that,
no, once in a while, and I'll just briefly, because most people know it, I'll just,
yeah.
and I've never gone into this kind of detail with anybody. I mean, I've done it personally one-on-one with people,
Well,
but
thank
I
you.
don't know. I think it's probably because I don't feel like I should preach about myself. It's about the word of God, and so I've never gone,
Interesting.
I've just said briefly, I was in a comatose, and that's why I'm a minister.
Wow.
Right? I went into the ministry kicking and screaming,
Yeah.
John, there's always the ministry, Deborah. Every time I'd come back and say, psychology isn't really enough for God, I got to do something else. And then he said, well, there's always seminary. I said, girls don't go to seminary. And then I found, okay, so I want to be a chaplain in prison. I want to deal with clinical pastoral psychology. That's, because Berkeley has this double degree. I can do that, and I don't ever want to go into the parish. No way, no way. There's always seminary. So I went to seminary, but even then, the call committee or whatever you guys call it in your Episcopal tradition, it was pastoral nominating committee, said, well, you should have to work in a church first before you work in, as a prison chaplain. And I said, you know what? I fought you guys for 4 years going to seminary. You tell me in scripture where Jesus prioritized ministry, where he said it's only to be in the church, and so, and then I thought, oh, I'm putting my head on a chopping block. Oh, they're gonna like kick me out. And it was so funny. I got the best support from this older guy from Walnut Creek who was a bank executive, and all these people are saying, wow, she's offensive, and rah, 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 rah. And this guy, she didn't offend me. She told it exactly like it is. Let me tell you about this program I supported at San Quentin. And it was, thank you, God. It's like,
And I
so
imagine
entertaining.
you shared this experience with the call committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Did anybody, when you first, so I know it was a long process of recovery, and I hear that too, that after this experience of bliss, they don't want to come back. They do come back, usually it's communicated that you need to come back for a reason, or sometimes there's a choice,
Right.
and they decide to come back, and then it's pretty miserable, physically
Oh,
miserable
it was awful.
suffering. But then it's sometimes a long time before they share their experience. So did it take a while for you to share with others? And now you shared pretty quickly, and people were always pretty open to it.
Yeah, but you're a teenager, right? So I went back to school limping and seeing double, and so yeah, and it was hard to watch my friends, take off and do all this stuff, and I couldn't, I was still working with my mobility, and of course I couldn't play any sports again. They made me, the assistant coach on everything, and the cheerleading coach put me on the squad because she said you made it 6 years in a row. There's no reason why you wouldn't. But the rest of my squad had to like put their legs next to mine to make sure I wouldn't fall over. If I felt bad for them. But again, small town, right?
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so I didn't talk about it much because it's not the kind of thing my classmates gave a crap about, but again in college though, I went into psychology, and my first thing I did was studying all the near-death experiences at the time in the late 70s, what was written about it, and just feeling these connections with, wow, that's probably what happened. Because I mean, I call it a near-death experience because the doctors told my parents to get ready for a funeral. So, I mean, if I wasn't that
Yeah.
close, you know,
Yeah.
um,
Well, it's certainly in the same kind of general category.
right.
Yeah, I was just reading at the end of this, I mean, there's so many books written about, this is the first one. He's the one who came up with the term, Raymond Moody came up with the term near-death experience.
Yeah.
But he said there are other experiences, even times of deep isolation for long periods of time, people can have somewhat similar experiences. I don't know if he wrote it so much about comas, but yeah, that definitely I think would be in that same general category.
Well, and I think some of these books too, like My Stroke of Insight, will talk about how you can access this part of your brain with through meditation
Yeah.
and just deep, just quieting this mind and this endless chatter, the circuitous, just endless chatter. I know it's hard to do. It's hard for me to do. And yeah, I'd love to, at one point I even wanted to get hypnotized to see if I could go back and try to recapture some of this memory stuff that I lost. But then I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to go back there. I don't want to, I came back once. I don't want to risk
Yeah.
not coming back again. But all joking aside, the whole how do we access this now, right? How do we, and being in the present moment is the stuff I've read anyway, says that's the best way to try to do that.
Mm.
Just keep trying to, silence yourself and getting back there, and all the rest of it falls away, and yes, just this, um I don't know. There's something to be said for being forced into that by being comatose. But yeah, the more we can just end this, and just recognizing when you can experience the oneness of all, how can we end up at this divisiveness? And how can we? I mean, everything seems so crazy now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like we're at risk of losing our democracy. I feel like people are so mean-spirited. I feel like, why is hate selling, and why is the media focusing on all this fear and chaos? When if we can see the divine life in people, how can we feel that way about them?
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question. I'm going off on.
Yeah. Well, one thing well, there are a couple other questions. I want to hear
Go
more.
ahead.
I want to hear more about this court of life and some other thoughts, but based on what you just said, you know, I've heard some people talk about somewhat distressing near-death experiences, almost as if there's a shadow side. Those aren't talked about as much. They also talk about life reviews and how, but even that tends to be just totally drenched in compassion. Like they experience something they did in their whole life that is reviewed, but they experience something they did that may have hurt somebody, but they actually experience it from that person's perspective, and they realize, oh, that was really hurtful, but they're accompanied by this other presence that is not condemning them, but is sort of saying, hey, yeah, how could you have done it that differently? This is a learning process. And then also, and this is the piece that I find difficult. There's this one woman who shared her near-death experience and said that she talked about this universalism that was so extreme that, ultimately, and not even ultimately, but like when we die, even those people who would we want to see it punished, or at least go through some sort of form of justice. I mean, thinking about maybe people who abuse children. That came up, and the woman said, "Oh no, I actually got to experience some of that," because she said, "Oh yeah, actually, I was a victim of that, and I got to experience what was the eternal destiny for this person who hurt me, and it was actually just love." And the interviewer was like, That's going to be hard. I mean, that's going to be hard because it's hard for us to just go straight to love and compassion for certain people, especially, I mean, for me, for people who are constantly fomenting hatred and division, and politicians who just thrive on this. It's like I want to see some sense of justice, and yet there's also this oneness and universalism. So that's what's troubling, and maybe that's the divisiveness within me of still wanting to see somebody like Donald Trump getting a big, slap across the face to
Amen
wake up.
to that, brother. No,
So yeah,
no, seriously, I hear what you're saying. And for me, that's difficult too, because yeah, it's hard. And again, this goes back to how I felt about prisoners. It's like I didn't have compassion for white collar criminals at all.
right.
At all. But I had a lot of compassion even for child molesters and rapists, even though those were the hardest ones to deal with, because at the time, when I did clinical pastoral education, I worked at Vacaville State Prison and the federal prison at Pleasanton and the county jail in Martinez and a little bit at San Quentin. So I've been around. And yeah, the child molesters were really hard to deal with. And guess what? I found in reading their jackets, their files, 99.9% of them had been so severely abused as kids themselves.
Yeah.
It was easier to find compassion once I knew their stories, because there, but for the grace of God, go any of us. I didn't choose my parents. I didn't choose the fact that my uncle didn't rape me. My dad didn't molest me. I don't have cigarette burns on my chest from what my mom's stepdad did to me. Even Charlie Manson, I'm not kidding you, okay? So I worked with him in Vacaville, oh God, he had mesmeric eyes. He never needs to be released. However, he was so severely abused in orphanages in Ohio. The mass murder, Ed Kemper, in California, picking up hitchhikers and killing them and having sex with their dead bodies because his mom was so cruel. She made him sleep in his feces and urine from the time he was a kid till the time he was 5 years old. She beat him, mercilessly. His mother was a governess at UC Santa Cruz. Why didn't somebody say something somewhere? This kid should have never had to grow up like he thought. His mom and sisters were in heaven while he was in the basement suffering through that ordeal. He thought he couldn't have women alive, that they had to be dead. I mean, they've done some incredible TV series about this guy, Ed Kemper. But anyway, and I worked with him more extensively than Manson. And I had compassion for him because we created that monster, and we didn't have to have all those victims, all those women that died. If we put money in prevention, if we, as a religious community, judge not lest ye be judged, because there, for the grace of God, go any one of us. I mean, I thank my lucky stars I came out of these prisons every day. My English, forget it. I feel like I'm back in there and slipping. When I came out of the gate every night, I used to thank God for my upbringing, because I didn't choose it. I'm not a Calvinist. I don't believe in predestination like that, and they didn't choose their background either. They didn't choose that. And yet that happened to them. So yeah, I was comforted in my experience, like some of these people say, about this expanding sense of grace. This, like you were saying, that this with other people. I mean, I was only a teenager, so I didn't feel like I really did anything wrong, quote unquote, yet, or whatever. I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes since then. So probably my coma experience doesn't really relate to that. It just relates to a lot of other stuff about oneness.
Well, you bring up another point that I find challenging in my brief exposure to other near-death experiences, and that is this idea of reincarnation. Those who have had pretty intensive near-death experiences and actually have conversations with the guide, it becomes clear to them that there is reincarnation, which is not, an official part of Christian theology, and yet I'm open to it. And yet there's even stuff in the Bible about, people think that Jesus or John the Baptist was Elijah reincarnated, or even
Right.
Jesus was John the Baptist reincarnated. But when they also talk about reincarnation, almost every time they do speak as if we did choose the
Huh.
life. Like, oh, you actually did choose your parents and you chose this life. And you said yes to it, you thinking this was going to help your soul grow this particular life. And that I find really fascinating, as well as a bit disturbing when I think of some of the experiences you just talked about. When I think about Betty Chin's childhood, it's like, whoa, did she did she know? Did her soul, her pre-incarnate soul, know what she was getting into? And she said yes because she knew she was going to be able to integrate that and transform that for healing in the world, which is such a profound idea. And yet, what the problem with it is that it can lead to victim blaming, like,
Right.
oh, well, you suffered, but you chose it, so it's your fault. So
Right.
that's again,
Kind of
it's like,
like
ooh,
karma, whatever. Yeah.
right, exactly.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
All I know is yeah, I mean, I'm open to reincarnation too, because I feel like, okay, I didn't have that body, whatever that meant. I just know I was at one with the divine life. And does that mean I can, like our we have a lot of Native American friends, and we've done a lot of Native American ministry and with the Lakota Sioux and the Navajo. And our friend Tilly Black Bear has this great saying about how we're spirits on an earthly journey.
mhm.
And if we're spirits on an earthly journey, and I totally can relate to that, um, who knows? My spirit might have another earthly journey.
Yeah,
Will I be aware of it? Probably not.
yeah,
So, that's why we can speculate all day long. And again, it's part of the mystery. It's part of
right.
the because if people could remember, I mean, some people claim they're reincarnated, but who knows? I'm not going to judge that. I don't know.
Right, yeah.
But I'm
One,
open to it too, you know?
and it sounds, but yeah, as much as it might be interesting to learn about past lives, it does seem like another major teaching is what you've already said, is that the invitation is to be present here and now. That's what we're constantly being invited into.
Right, right.
And I also, it makes me wonder, as much as these bodies are annoying, and I'm still recovering from COVID and coughing, I almost wonder, is like, as blissful as it is to be in this out of body experience, I wonder if we're in this experience now for a particular reason, and partly to appreciate the limitations, because it's temporary, it's not eternal.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, yeah, I mean, it's what we do with tragedies that makes a difference, right? It's
Right.
not that life's not going to throw stuff at us. Um, that's part of joy and sorrow. I mean, you have to have lament, right? To
Yeah.
really appreciate yeah, I mean, how else do we don't appreciate stuff unless we know the contrast. And
Right.
that's
Right.
the other major world religions will focus like a lot on the yin and the yang and the um dualistic understanding of life. So, and in that sense, Christian theology plays into that too, you know?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's why one reason I love the fact that when Episcopalians gather, we celebrate the Eucharist, which means Thanksgiving. Let us give
Right.
thanks. It is a right, good, and right, proper thing always and everywhere to give thanks to the Lord. And give thanks for health. Give thanks for having all your fingers available to you, um,
Yeah.
which you're probably appreciating now more than ever.
Oh, indeed.
Or what
Indeed.
you would appreciate once you're
You know,
using your fingers.
I mean, this isn't really relevant, but it is. So I was doing water aerobics last week,
Hmm.
and there's this woman who shows up. She was born with no legs
Mm.
and only half of one arm, and she swims every day in the pool. She gets herself in the wheelchair and gets in the pool and then gets herself up on the chairlift and and gets her body, but she's no legs at all. So she just is a torso with one full arm and half of another.
Wow.
And she's got the best disposition I've ever met in one of the best dispositions about how she appreciates life.
Mm.
So the other on last week, I had dropped one of my lockers on my foot and it was so painful, and I was limping into the pool, and I said, "Oh, I just dropped it. My foot hurts like that." And I told this to this lady. And as soon as it came out of my mouth, I thought to myself, "Oh my God, she must think she wishes she had a toe to be painful, right?"
Mm.
And guess what? She made a joke about it right after I thought that. She said, "Well, yeah, I wish I had a foot to do, that it was painful." And I said, "Oh, Lynn, I'm so sorry. I just thought that very thing, and I just felt so bad that I said it." And she laughed and laughed, and she said, "I have to joke about stuff like that because otherwise, you know, I got to find humor and stuff." Well,
Yeah.
we had this great dialogue afterwards. We talk all the time in the pool, and she does what she can, swimming away. But it's every time I see her, I think, "Oh my God, I could have been there too."
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
accident experience. I could have, when they said I would never walk again, I could have been in a wheelchair the rest of my life. I could have,
Yeah.
and just,
You appreciate
yeah,
everything.
it's,
Yeah.
it's just, it moves you. And,
So tell me about this.
huh?
y- I'm familiar with Ecclesiastes. I remember I took a class on it fuller, but I don't remember the court of life. Tell me.
I know, I should have
Uh,
Googled it before our meeting, and I'm sorry I didn't, because I don't know
okay.
where it is exactly, but it's there.
A chord as in like a chord that connects things, not like a guitar chord, but like a,
No, no, no. Yeah, a cord that connects it. A
yeah.
golden, I think it's a golden. I can't remember exactly, but Google it. It'll probably
Yeah.
come up with your Ecclesiastes, but they
Well,
call it the cord of life.
why did that resonate with you so much?
Um, just because that's kind of how I felt, like the pulling sensation when I came back to all the machines.
Brought you back. Okay.
Hooked up to all the machines, and like I said, I saw double, so I woke up. I couldn't move my right side. I'm like looking at everybody at my hospital bed, and she came through. She's alive, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I couldn't talk, so I just moved my hand and they brought me a pencil and I tried to scratch out what happened. That was
Mhm.
the first thing I did. My parents wouldn't even tell me how bad things were until I was able to speak better, because they didn't want to freak me out. They didn't tell
Yeah.
me that I lost my spleen. They didn't tell me, that I had I think they just told me I had a bladder repair. They didn't tell me I fractured my skull. They didn't tell me I busted my pelvis in 8 places, that I busted my tailbone.
Mm.
I forgot all that when I told you my original story. But yeah, so
Wow.
I don't have my right side is smashed in. I don't have that one hole in your pelvis. They have two holes in it. Well, one's all smashed, and that's why I had to have my daughter's C-section, because they didn't know if I could carry children. I have all these bones jutting out in the birth canal. But and the fractured skull piece they knew would bother me, because like, how much brain damage did I sustain, really?
Yeah.
Fortunately, hopefully it was mostly physical, but um every once in a while my husband will kid me, "Nah, it's not just physical, right?" you lo-
You're right, right. What would the it sounds like something he would do. What
yeah,
what did the doctors say? Were they kind of blown away as if it were a
yeah, a miracle. In fact, my neurosurgeon told me, "Deb, you have an appreciation for life that most people don't get until they're at least middle age,
Yeah.
because of how, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm alive, you know,
Um,
I lived, I didn't die. So yeah. Um,
um,
and my teenage friends didn't understand it. They didn't get it. I mean,
well, and when you're a teenager, you're not thinking you're thinking about just how to enjoy life as much as possible and even recklessly. But
right,
but every human and then eventually deals with fear of death.
right,
What a gift you have to share your fearlessness based on your experience of how blissful it is. And that, another kind of motivation for these near death experiences for me learning about them is what I was talking about several months ago at Grace Good Shepherd about my close friend who took his life last summer, and I had another friend who took his life before that. And so I can't help but wonder where he is, even though he grew up Christian but became an atheist. Um, I still sense his presence, and I like to imagine that he is at least on a journey towards experiencing that bliss, if not already.
sure,
Um, right? Because when it comes to suicide, I mean, that's the other thing. From a purely logical, and maybe it's not that logical, but it seems on purely logical perspective, if it's so blissful, as everybody says it is, then why don't we all go? But that also seems to be the case. The people who have near-death experiences, like yourself, who know it's amazing, also know that it's important to be here in this life now and not to bypass it to get back to that bliss.
right. Why would you end a life when it's a gift? Why would you?
Because for some people it feels like a
Right,
horrible
right,
situation to
right.
want
And
to
I
get out.
also think that suicide, most everybody I know, it's because they can't stand the pain, or like, Robin Williams, they don't want to have Lewy body's dementia. I mean, my dad died of that. I can't even imagine. I
Wow.
told Lynn to help me end it if I ever get diagnosed with something like that.
Mm,
Um, I think anybody that wants to end it prematurely, is, suffering. Talk about not guilty by reason of insanity. I mean, I think you have temporary insanity, or you're temporarily in so much pain and you hurt so bad that you are not capable of choosing what's rationally right for you.
yeah.
Because I think it's just so overwhelming that it clouds whatever neurotransmitters are functioning or not functioning in your brain, however you want to explain it medically, that yeah, I mean, it's sad. It's overwhelmingly sad.
Yeah.
I mean, you and my husband talked about it too. His two best friends committed suicide, and he, you know, uh wrote two very wonderful songs about it, but it still
Mm,
pains him to this day.
yeah.
Um yeah, because obviously they have not experienced that bliss yet. And if they had, I don't know if you, in your research on near-death experiences, have you come across any of those people that have committed suicide since?
Actually, yes, there was one.
Oh, really? Interesting.
And I was surprised how
Because they wanted to go back to that sense of bliss, or
no, it was a woman who she actually had she was a mother, and she said like all throughout her life she'd always kind of it was always kind of a comfort that she could always check out of this life when she needs to, and she overdosed on some drugs in the back of a car, and as she was entering into it she was actually praying like a mantra like God is love, God is love, God loves me, God loves me, God is not going to abandon me. And then she did enter into this really blissful state, but then she came back, and I guess probably, but even the coming back wasn't all that painful. I was just surprised how there wasn't much of a, and this is my upbringing, or also maybe just a sense of justice. Like to make a decision like that, especially when you have children,
I
just
know,
seems so selfish that
it is.
I feel like it would make sense for somebody to just kind of, hey, you need a little smack across the face to wake up out of your selfishness. That in this particular account, and there, I'm sure there are other, I know there are other, well, I'm sure there are some other accounts. I was surprised by the lack of punishment. It was more just restorative, which is what
Yeah,
we hope all, you know,
right,
prisons become, not just retributive justice, but restorative
right.
justice. So that's surprising, as but it's also, yeah, I also,
And who
but
knows, maybe her kids were better off with family members. Who knows where the kids ended up? Who
well,
knows?
actually, that I'm remembering that's why she came back, because she saw an image of one of her children much older, and the child was saying, "I need you to come back," and then she came back. Um, yeah, so that did pull her heartstrings, her soul strings, so to
Yeah,
speak. But also this idea of the life review, that's powerful to me, because this idea of reviewing everything I did in my life, or even somebody like, okay, let's say Hitler, reviewing
right.
his life and the decisions he made that affected millions of other people.
I
I mean,
know.
to like to experience, oh, I caused this amount of pain and suffering for this family and all those descendants, and that happened 6 million times over, and you have to experience all that. That that sounds pretty heavy. and and I want my dear friend to be in bliss and forgiven, and I pray for him all the time. And I wonder if he experienced how painful it was to me and to his family and to his other friends to learn the news, and how dreadful that would be for him to experience all that. Um, and yet there's almost this desire that he does, in order to see how much he was loved, and how much his behavior hurt those who loved him.
I
Does that
think
make sense?
I think when you're in another dimension, though, those kind of things aren't even going to come to your awareness. But that's just me. I mean, that's something to think about when we're here still, and we can hope that. And
That's true. Yeah, I think, yeah. It sounds like in your case, you were basically in this other dimension.
yeah,
You so far.
totally.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad we got to record it. Um, have you written about it?
Only in psychology papers.
Oh, oh, right. When you were at University of Michigan.
Yeah, and I was published in a Chicago Theological Seminary when I was the director of their Center for Community Transformation, um, with some students, and we were studying what made vital congregations and trying to help teach the students what successful churches look like, and we're going around all in Chicago. And yeah, that because I had breast cancer during that time, so
Oh,
I that it all corresponded to all of that. Yeah, I was like, oh geez, God, you put me through one thing. Now you
yeah,
it's like my home church pastor said, Deb, we'll get you through again. That was
yeah.
20 years ago. But it has made me a better minister,
I bet.
all of this stuff. You can walk with people when it's
Have you
happening.
met others who, yeah, especially families that are grieving the loss, death in the family,
Yep.
or somebody who's in hospice. Um, have you met others who have had similar experiences, or even in
And
humble county?
mostly I've just read about them. I've not
Yeah,
really met people.
there are a lot of them, and yet they're also still, generally speaking, kind of rare. So
Yeah.
it's it's an honor to hear your story,
Thanks. I appreciate
and I'm
it.
sure I'll have more questions later on. But um,
Okay.
thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Blessings. You too.
Bye.